Have you ever thought about how outdated your perception of yourself actually is? Because there's a way in which you've learned to perceive yourself. You have certain expectations of yourself as an individual. And as a result, you behave in the way that you anticipate someone like you would behave in certain situations. But what if your perception of yourself is now outdated? One of the most classic examples of how dangerous it is to hold on or cleave onto an outdated perception of yourself or even of other people is when you look at how technology functions, right? Whether you're looking at your phone, cell phone device, which most of us are very familiar with this concept when tied to our cell phone devices, or even Windows computer systems, right? There was a time when we used to use Windows 98 and Windows Vista. All those old versions of Windows used to be a thing once upon a time. But nowadays, if you were to try to take something that is modern and install it on a Windows 98 computer, it would be outdated. It would not work because you need a far more advanced operating system to make even the most basic of software and applications work. Like if you look at WhatsApp, for example, there are cell phone devices and Android versions and even iOS versions that can no longer support WhatsApp because they've become so advanced. WhatsApp has become so updated that old devices can no longer handle it. How the size of WhatsApp is no longer compatible with old devices. There are some technologies and things that WhatsApp is able to do that old devices just can't handle. They would either get overheated or they would restart and reboot. It would just not be able to compute. So my question to you is this: are you married to an old and outdated perception of yourself that perhaps you are still using things and expecting them to work on you that are no longer compatible with the person that you should now be? Right? And a classic example, you can use a toddler. There's a certain age at which a toddler uses a nappy, or you bath a toddler in a certain way. And the more they age, you change the things, the tools that you use in order to take care and nurture that toddler. You change their clothes, you change their teeth that they're sucking, and there comes an age when they stop using that teeth. But now here's the thing about being an adult: the more you grow, the less you think and consider consciously the things that you should no longer be using. And especially for people who are hoggers. You know, I know someone who's married to a hogger. Their partner is such a huge hogger. Like they'll basically go out and find something, and they find it to be of sentimental value, so they don't want to get rid of it, and so they hog and hold on to it. And when you try to find what is its utility, how is it working for them at this point in time, you don't and you can't see it, right? You can't see how is it now serving them. It has become obsolete and it is now outdated, right? And this is the way that I want you to think of the things in your life, not just the material things, but I want you to think of yourself just internally, the things that are of the things that you're consuming, the shows that you're watching, the things that keep you entertained. What of those things is now outdated, and you're just taking WhatsApp and trying to feed it to a Sinbad? That's the old operating system. I think it was called Sinbad that Nokia used to use. Or a version of Android, like version 1 of Android, is now can no longer use some of the most recent apps that we're using, even Gmail or whatever software, Google Maps. Couldn't the most recent version of Google Maps cannot work on old operating systems. So I want you to picture yourself like a cell phone. And how many updates have you made to yourself? But there are things that are in your life that you're just not willing to let go of. There are certain ideas of yourself that you're not willing, and expectations of who you are that you're just not willing to let go of. And when will that time be when you're now going to sit down and do inventory on, you know what, I've outgrown this and I need to let go of it? I now need to have a perception of the person and update my perception of myself and let it correspond to my age. Right? Let it correspond with my responsibilities. Like there was a time when, for example, you were in primary. Now you're in high school. You need to update your perception of yourself. You're in high school now. There are certain expectations that you should have of yourself. You need to be proud of being a high schooler. There are certain responsibilities that you're going to have. Homework is no longer the same, right? Now you're going to have to. I mean, back in primary, your homework. You did need to make time for homework, and you made a certain allocation of time, and then you had time to go and play. But now that you're in high school, right, the last 5 years of your school life before you go to varsity, how much of a commitment should you be giving to your high school, especially because high school is also separated between junior and senior, because the last 3 years, grade 10, 11, and 12, that's when you're supposed to be giving the hardest push of your life, because that's going to determine which school do you go to in, after you finish your matric. So it's very important for you to update the version of yourself that you have in your mind and let it correspond with the kind of life that you're living now and the current situation that you find yourself in now. Once you get to varsity, you're going to have to update that perception of yourself. For those of you who are in varsity, one of the biggest challenges you're going to have to face is learning to be disciplined while remaining independent. That's the hardest thing to do. When you have independence and you're in varsity and you've left home and you've come to live at res, or you're renting somewhere at an apartment, or renting with a friend or with a brother or sister, you are now more independent than you used to be when you were back home. See, now it matters to be disciplined, and you're going to need to update that to update your habits, your behavior to the current version of yourself. Then there'll be those of you who have now recently finished varsity, and now you have to get into work. You need to look for a job. You need to update your dress code. You need to change the way that you clothe yourself, the way that you view fashion, the way that you use your spare time, the way that you think about your future, because the next few years of your life are the ones that are going to determine how diligent and how many opportunities are open for you when it comes to building and having a good financial experience, right? And a good career. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about the fact that you're going to need to learn to let go of the old perception of yourself, because there are some people who now are parents and they've not understood that their responsibilities have changed, that their priorities need to change, that they now need to perceive themselves as parents first before they perceive themselves as, a gamer, or before they perceive themselves as an artist. You need to shift the idea of who you are. And that's a thing. I remember I've spoken about this before, that I meet people who you can clearly see that they are married to a younger version of themselves, something that was important to them when they were younger, and it's still important to them now. And they haven't made the effort of sitting down and having that conversation to themselves, like, should popularity still matter to me now? I'm old. Who cares how popular I am, right? In high school, it used to matter. Right? You used to want to be the popular kid because you knew popularity in high school is a currency. But the older you get, the less it matters. Should you be so invested in being the most well-known? Yes, it's still, the older you get, the popular you are, it is still an asset. But should it be your identity, though? And what priorities in your life need to shift? What are the things that you need to leave behind? And you know how a snake or lizards, a lot of reptiles do this, right? They molt, they shed their skin. Birds also do this to their feathers because they're getting older. They're learning to understand that I need a new cloak now. I need to put on a new garment. I cannot, the Bible actually says, I hope I'm going to quote this correctly. You cannot use old wineskins to repair new wineskin because it's going to tear. Or you can't use, if I think I'm quoting it correctly, I might be misquoting it, but obviously the point remains the same. So the question then becomes, look at yourself and ask yourself, if you are not in a new wineskin, like you have now grown and you have matured and your circumstances have changed in such a way that you need to update everything else in order for it to align. The reason that this conversation is important is because when you start getting rid of the things that used to matter to you when you were younger, or that used to matter to you when you were in a different context, and now you start pushing them aside and deciding to yourself, this is no longer important to me, and it shouldn't be important to me. You can't be the 16, 17, or 18-year-old young adult who still wants to keep their favorite blanket close to them, right? And you get anxious whenever you're not with it and clinging onto it or sleeping with it. You can understand, I'm using a ridiculous analogy because even some of the things that seem to not be that ridiculous, they are that ridiculous. And we do need to come to an understanding of the fact that the things that we value and we cling onto the older we get, and the things that we're not willing to let go of, the perception of ourselves that we're not willing to let and allow to evolve and to be updated to our current context, right? That needs to change. You need to let go of that. You need to lose that. You need to be willing to say to yourself, you know what? I used to be a person who used to game and play games for like 3 hours a day. But nowadays, I'm willing to spend 30 minutes to an hour and then go continue being the person that I've become now. Perhaps if gaming is your career and that's what you've made it, that's a different story, right? If you game casually and you're doing it for fun, ask yourself how much time should you be investing in doing that. If you used to be a person who is highly invested in watching series and you want to stay up to date with the latest show, Wednesday, for example, one of the most popular shows in our time right now, do you really want to be the person who's constantly wanting to keep up with the latest program? Or should you be shifting your priorities to where your life is right now? Should you be updating the version of yourself? I know I know that I've met and I've lived with a person who's married, and they had not updated their version of themselves because they had not let go of the old perception of themselves, because they were still sitting down on their phone and playing games for hours. And their parent, they had not even a toddler, a child, a baby, and they could sit on the couch and play Candy Crush and Farm Heroes. I can't remember what the title of that game was. So this is a very important conversation to have with yourself, because there are things that you might still be doing that are no longer appropriate for a person in your stature, a person of your caliber, a person who is now in the context that you're in. So yeah, just something for you to think about.